Okay. Okay. It is May 4th, 2020, and I am here with our creative writing YouTube session number 5. It's May the 4th, be with you. So I have my little buns on today. And I have a guest for our class today, my friend Lindsay Jameson. She is a
Hi
writer.
guys.
There she is. She's a writer. She's a YA author, a screenwriter, and a journalist. And I've known Lindsay since we were in college. And like me, she's from New York City. And I don't know if I've told this class, but I'm from the Bronx and Lindsay's from Brooklyn. So we're both from New
Outer
York,
Borough.
different parts of New York. Yeah, outer borough girls. So I'm going to talk to Lindsay about her life as a writer, a little bit about how her writing developed over the years. But since this is a writing class, I want to keep it in the context of education and having some things that you can learn to apply to your own writing from hearing about a writer other than myself. So I'm going to start by asking Lindsay, Lindsay, did you write in high school? And what kind of things did you write? Anything memorable? And did it relate to what you've ended up writing as an adult?
So I always wrote. I was fortunate enough to go to 2 high schools that both had at least one creative assignment in English class a semester. So I always had the opportunity to write a short story. And I guess I did often. Those short stories were often semi-autobiographical, which I've now finally learned how to do that in a totally different way, where there's pieces of my life, but it's not a story from my life, but I'm still telling stories from my life in a totally fictitious way. So I feel like this book I'm working on now is a big change from that. But in high school, I still wrote mainly fictionalized autobiography. And I just want to, I know Jessica has a big stack of these too, but I want to show you because when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, my teacher brought, I'm going to show you, this is going to take a couple frames. This is one stack. I'm going to move them. You'll see from one side to the other. And another stack. And another stack. And another stack. Wait, let's go all the way back to when I was in 5th grade. I started writing these. And I wrote in 5th grade a lot for like mental health. I think my parents were divorced and that I just found that that was not, someone didn't recommend that I do that. I think someone gave me a diary that was like a Dear Diary fill out and I started to use it. But when I was in high school, there was a visiting lecturer and he showed us all of his journals. And he said, if you write in a journal every day, you know, by the time you're, 30, you'll have 24 books you've written. And so I really embraced that. And I always wrote in my journal. I wrote growing up in New York City, there's a lot of weird lag time. Either you're early somewhere because you didn't want to be late, or you're stuck on a train and you're late, or often you're early somewhere because you don't want to be late. Can you relate, Jessica? You know what I mean? So either you're reading, or if you have a notebook, it's great because you don't feel weird or like awkward that you're early. You have something to do. And so I always would write all sorts of descriptions of what I saw. I think a lot in those journals, a lot of descriptions of what I saw, what the light was like, what the noise was like, what people were saying. I looked through them the other day in preparation for this, and I have conversations with you, Jessica. I have conversations written down. I have descriptions of my backyard, and those have shown up in my in the book that I published. No, it's the book that I didn't publish. The first book that I wrote, there was a lot of description of my childhood, and I found pages in my journals that describe exactly the backyard. Like the reason I remember it so clearly is because I wrote it down then. I'm sure it's almost identical this many years later when I write down what it was like. For instance, in the spring right now, probably in New York, there's wisteria and cherry blossoms. And that would make my backyard just all pink and purple for about a week. It was, anyway, does that answer your question? I did.
Yeah.
So I knew I was never a great, I was sort of an average student, but except for the first assignment that I told Jessica about before this started, writing was always something, even in 8th grade, where I would get accolades from my teacher. So I sort of thought, oh, this is something that I'm going to do well in. And so I had the confidence, I think, to always embrace those assignments.
I love that you brought up the journals, because
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, the very first one of these sessions that I did was all about journaling. And it was about journaling as a tool for writers, but also journaling for mental health, like during this time. And actually, I've recovered like my everyday journaling habit since this has started, right? Like
Oh,
I'm
I mean, I
able,
should probably do that.
yeah, and I realize like it's been really interesting, and because life has been so slow at times, I've also started to do the kind of journaling where I'm also writing about the light, like the slot of light coming into my bedroom, or the sound of the birds. Like I'm starting to get my voice again in terms of picking up
It's
my world.
it's really great practice, because writing, uh, even if the world you're building on the page is the world that you live in, a lot of times you assume that everybody sees what you see when you first write a scene that happens in the regular contemporary world. You don't go to the extra trouble that you might if it was period or sci-fi, but you need to, because you want to have full real world. And learning to write descriptions and adding in, it's just another place where you can emphasize your theme, or you can make a point that if your character is noticing a slash of light over there instead of listening to the conversation, that's saying something about that character and how, they're distracted. Like, you can use all of that, but you can't use it unless you know how to write it, and you can't know how to write it unless you practice writing it. And it really is a weird thing. And also, Jessica and I both did a lot of film. We were filmmaking partners. And I think that writing about the light, especially, I took the train to school every day. I took the subway over the Manhattan Bridge every morning. And I often wrote every single day, would write how the light was different on the water and the buildings. And then in filmmaking, that was also a helpful, at least to acknowledge the power of telling a story with some other, not just you're using words to tell the story, but you're creating a picture that helps tell the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that we've gone off on this, because one of the things that I've noticed with my students, and we talked about it a little bit in school while we were still together this semester, was very often students default to this kind of world building or storytelling where they're describing like, and then this happens, and then this happens, but they don't have practice in writing scenes.
Right.
And this kind of descriptive writing is really important to write an actual scene, right?
It
Like,
grounds the characters.
yes.
It grounds your whole world. And I'm in grad school now. I had one time, I had a professor while I was in grad school who made us journal. She also made us use the Webster's, I think it's 1813 is the edition. It's either 1813 or 1838. Do you have it? It's the most beautiful dictionary. I don't know. I think Jessica knows this about me. I'm a little bit of a dictionary collector, but she would have us write 3 words, any word you find, just write the definition in our little journal. And then she wanted us to try to write our dreams and then journal like every single day. And I did it I filled a whole nother journal, and I should still do it, but it was great. And it's when I started writing this new book, which has nothing to do with that's journal. Well, yeah. Maybe it does a little bit. Actually, it does a little bit.
I'm just smiling also because like, I think in my like video number 2, I pulled out a dictionary. So what I'm liking about this conversation is how much you're echoing the things that I always say, because I feel like
I should have brought my dictionary.
Who says this?
I should have brought my dictionary, because it's upstairs. Hey, Tessie. No, I don't have my assistant, but my child assistant. But this version of the dictionary, the original older Webster's, or even the most recent Webster's, I recommend looking at the word in the dictionary before you just hit the thesaurus on your computer, because there's often a lot of meaning in the word that gives you ideas for other words, rather than just scouring, scouring a thesaurus is great too. You do it, but I feel like that's a final draft thing you do for an editing tool. And sometimes looking up a word just helps you solve, even a critical essay, even more so a critical essay. It helps you solve the riddle of how are you going to write that essay and what words you're going to use that will, really get your point across.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, we are off on a tangent.
It's not a tangent at all, because it's this topic of vocabulary that I've been talking about lately with the students.
Yeah, I'm very, very picky about the vocabulary that I use. I use very plain words, but the trouble is you really have to. Are we the same? Are we just the same?
No,
over
but
and
I'm
over
just
again?
remembering that you and I were working on a project, and we once had an argument over the word Parmesan. And
that's my father. I apologize. My father's a real snooty snoot, and he thinks you have to say Parmigiana every time you order it. And if you say Parmesan or Parmesan, or it's like the same with, it has to be croissant. Now, that's just not so anymore. And actually, Benjamin Dreyer, who wrote that wonderful book this summer that I love, that book, he says, go ahead and just say croissant. Like, you don't have to say croissant. It's just, I apologize, Jessica, if I ever did that to you. It was inbred in me. I'm sorry.
It's quite all right. So moving on, but also related. So I want to ask you like a two-part question, maybe three-part. Like, why were you writing in the first place when you started to write fiction, and what part of it came easily to you, right? Like, and also, what part did you have to work on as you've grown as a writer? Like, what have you actually had to learn as opposed to what came out of you naturally?
Okay, so what came out of me naturally was writing what was happening within me. Like, I was really good at writing how I could write a scene, like in ballet class, that was very, people would read it and they could sort of, they would tell me that they could they really liked that they could feel this situation. They could really feel like they were there. I have a natural use of my sentence structure. It's just always been easy for me, really easy. And now I'm learning more why that is, which is great. I didn't think going to grad school I would learn as much as I've learned about how much I've improved my prose. But I always kind of had a natural knack for prose. And I think that's just from reading a lot as a kid. But what came hard to me, so I could tell you that my agent now I got, but I was first rejected by this agent. And he said in the letter, your prose tricked me into reading the whole book. And then I got to the end and realized there was no plot. So that has always, so this book that I'm working on now, I have a plot, I have a dead body, which I'm really excited about. But I am now getting the note for the first time ever that I raced ahead in the second half of the book and only wrote plot. And my professor, who's a fiction writer, was like, this is practically just a screenplay at this one, after page like 150, which I don't take as a huge insult, but he's like, you need to put all that emotion back. The first half of the book has all this emotion and all of these details, and you're so inside these girls' heads. And I'm just sort of thrilled that the plot works. So I now have to go back and expand, like it's gonna just grow, which I'm afraid of, like a balloon. Because it's already 317 pages and it's YA. I don't want it to be that long. But so plot has always been a problem for me because I'm like, oh, it's just about this girl. But you need a plot, and you need a plot to hang your writing skills on. I think, I don't know, the reader needs a plot. I don't need it as much, but I'm learning, and screenwriting, of course, is a great way to cross-training writing, if you will, because it requires so much plot. But even I've always struggled with plot. That's always been hard for me. And story, not at all, but plot.
So how would you distinguish between story and plot?
Well, because story does not necessarily have a motor in it. And I'm sure that there's a better definition for that, but I could tell a story about, a mouse. I remember that I wrote a story that I wrote in 8th grade for the essay application for high schools was about a mouse that I'd found in my shoe. That's a true story. I went to put my shoes on in Brooklyn, and they always had these little, I guess they're little city mice, little country mice, but I mean, they're tiny. So it's hard. They're not rats. They're teeny tiny little mice. They will look you in the eye, but they're tiny. And I found one in my shoe, and that was a story that I wrote, but it didn't really have, it was just a story about the mouse, and it was a funny story. It was a short story, but it didn't have an arc to it. It didn't have the character of the little girl finding the mouse doesn't have an epiphany.
Right.
She doesn't change at all. And I think the character arc is also different than plot, although I like to think that I could create a plot that's driven by the character arc. That's ideal. That if I think the character's arc and the character's growth or their inability to grow or their flaws create plot, that's real screenplay writing. That's real definition of screenplay writing. But a place, it's like a motor, the plot, like the mystery of the story, who's the dead body, or if it's a thriller, it's like, will this character get away from the thing? Will the character even figure out what the reader already knows? That keeps you turning the page. It's really the only way that I see. I'm really not great at plot, so it's hard for me to describe. I can tell a story about how we all went and did this thing. That's a story. But it's harder for me so I wrote a short story that's going to be published in June, and it's based on something that happened here in my household. But I should say that, but whatever. It's the plot then is sort of the backstory feeding in to why I chose to tell that story, if that makes sense.
Well, something that I'm hearing from what you're saying has to do, I think, with the distinction between, say, the short story form and the novel.
Well,
right?
That for sure. Yeah. Short story for me, the plot is just the epiphany. For me, I am fine. That to me is a perfect short story. I don't need to have a mystery. I just want to have it. I want the reader to realize that the character has had an epiphany. For me, that's a short story.
Yeah.
I don't like short stories that are particularly plot heavy.
Yeah. And
some people do.
Yeah. And it's funny because I first knew you as a short story writer, right?
Well, right, because
that's what you were doing in college. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that seems to be like, so it sounds like that's kind of a natural fit for how you experience the world. And then you've been developing this like bigger skill set to really string it all together and give someone an experience over the course of a novel.
I had a lot of help because the novel that I published was edited and published by the same person who's also published 4 novels, YA novels. Lexa Hillier, she's a new book out, kids, Frozen Beauty. It's actually really, really great. But she is sort of a master of plot. She went to Vassar also. She's 10 years younger, or maybe 11 years, some class of 2002, so 11 years. And she was an editor for years at Harper and learned and she was a theater minor. You can't really be that, but you know what I mean. At Vassar, it's hard to be a minor, especially with theater and English, and a poet. And she put those 2 things together, and she taught me plot more than anyone. She really just took the book and added an element of threat. Mm-hmm. She added the suspense, and that's how she's like, the reader needs to turn the page. They need to have a reason to turn the page. And it can't just be because they want to read more about this person's life that you're describing so well.
Right.
Even if it's naughty or salacious, it's still maybe not enough. So if you look at a book like Less Than Zero, he amps it up. And then when they turn it into a movie, they turn it up 2 more notches or 10 more notches.
Yeah.
With consequences and stakes, and all of those are plot devices.
Yeah. So we're winding down now because I don't want to take too long.
I'm sorry, we're running out.
I just want to ask you, why do you write?
It's funny because I asked myself that question. I can't stop. I've tried. I've really tried. I've tried to do something different. This is a very hard road. I've tried, but I can't stop. I have something happen and I need to write it down, or I have a thought or an idea. These journals, even, I just can't stop. It makes me feel good. And it makes me feel really bad when I get rejected, or, you know, when, you know, like there's times when I need some money, like there's things that make me feel bad about it, but I just can't stop. I've tried. I've legitimately tried. I don't take no for an answer. I just keep going.
Oh my God.
So,
Like I have the same answer too. I want to stop.
I want to communicate. I'll tell you the thing that I'm writing for, though. I'm writing for my reader. I want to have the moment that I remember having in high school, reading something like Howard's End or even Shakespeare, and feeling like, oh my God, I relate to that 100%. And that writer is no longer living, and I'm talking to that writer. And so I definitely write to try to shine a light on something that I feel is under illuminated, that there's people's lives and people's struggles that may be tiny but are defining, and that they don't get noticed. And I would say that's what I'm writing for. I want a teenager, in the case that I write a lot of YA, or anyone that was a teenager, to say, oh man, someone heard me. And I don't always get it right, but I have to say that more than anything, that's all I'm looking for. I just want someone in the world to read it and be like, oh, someone heard me. I know exactly what she means.
That is a beautiful answer.
Well, it's not, the answer should be, I write to tell stories that sell for a lot of money.
No, that should be the reason.
I mean, I don't know.
Well, thank you so much. And
wait, I want to just say one other thing.
Yeah.
Because part of that last thing that I said is that I don't think you have to make the story. I don't think anyone's personal struggle isn't big enough to write about. And I think this is really important for college essays. It's how you tell it and why it was a big deal. And I don't think you have to manufacture, in that instance, larger stakes. The only reason you need to manufacture larger stakes is to write a whole book. And within that book, you're trying to get these moments with your reader. But I really stress that even if you think you have the most normal life, that is, no one would be impressed by your struggle, think about that day that you feel that it's the hardest day. Write about that day, because you deserve that. Like, you deserve that moment, no matter what your circumstances are. Everyone has moments where they feel like this is just too hard, and why doesn't anyone understand how hard this is? And it could be, look, going to the grocery store right now, to me, is terrifying. And it gives me PTSD. Like, I leave and I cry in the store several times. I cry on my way out of the store through my mask and my goggles. It's grocery shopping. And I'm fortunate to be able to go buy enough groceries for 8 days. I get that. But what I'm experiencing at that moment is, it's not mundane. It's not mundane. You may think it's mundane, but you may worry that something that you know is not mundane will be mundane, perceived mundane by a reader. But if you write it in the way that you feel it, it's not mundane. That's my advice for your essays. You don't need to have horrible things happen.
That is a further beautiful closing. So thank you, Lindsay.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. Good luck to
Bye-bye.
you. Write in your journals.